This week marks the 50th anniversary of the Israeli occupation of Palestine and the six-day war that preceded it. At the start of 1967, the former British Mandate of Palestine stood divided between three powers. Firstly, there was the new state of Israel, which had declared itself in 1948 in tandem with the Nakba, or catastrophe, in which 700,000 Palestinians either fled or were driven from their homes by those clearing the ground for the new state. In addition, in 1967, Jordan controlled East Jerusalem and the West Bank, and Egypt controlled Gaza, having seized these territories during the War of 1948, launched by the surrounding Arab states against Israel and in response to the Nakba. This demarcation of Israeli territory, existing between 48 and 67, became known as the Green Line, and during these 19 years, many of those Palestinians who had fled during the Nakba now lived in refugee camps within the West Bank, Gaza, or the neighbouring Arab states, often in terrible conditions. It was also during this time that Israel began to consolidate itself, and tensions between Israel and its neighbours remained high, particularly with Egypt following the 1956 Suez conflict. Egyptian President Nasser, whose calls for Arab nationalism had made him a widely popular regional figure, regularly promised to recapture land taken by the Israelis for the Palestinians and the wider Arab nation. In May 1967, Nasser blocked the passage of Israeli ships through the Suez Canal and began to move Egyptian troops up to the Israeli border in the Sinai Desert. Some have claimed that this was Nasser inevitably preparing for his long-promised eradication of the Israeli state. Others have suggested that he was moving defensively in advance of a supposed Israeli attack on Syria. Others again have suggested that Israel had long been planning to seize even more territory and was looking for a sufficient excuse for action. Either way, on the 5th of June 1967, Israel launched an attack that caught Egypt completely by surprise, with an aerial bombardment destroying its air force followed by a ground offensive. Syria and Jordan soon joined the fray, but in just 6 days it was all over. Following the deaths of 20,000 Arab soldiers and only a few thousand Israeli, a ceasefire was signed, with Israel having captured Gaza and the Sinai from Egypt, East Jerusalem and the West Bank from Jordan, and the Golan Heights from Syria. Known as the Nakba or setback, this six-day war created a further 250,000 Palestinian refugees and 100,000 Syrian. There were now more Palestinians outside of Old Mandate Palestine than within. The defeat of the Arab armies was a devastating humiliation, spelling the end of both Nasser's power and the very ideology of Arab nationalism, and it led to a shift amongst the Arab states from questions of Israel's existence to one of its borders and territories. Within Israel, the recapture of the old city of Jerusalem brought the Western Wall, Judaism's holiest site, into Israeli control, and it consolidated the position of the Israeli army, known as the Israeli Defense Force, as the most powerful institution of the state. But the story does not end here. For those Palestinians that remained within the now Israeli-controlled East Jerusalem, West Bank, Golan Heights and Gaza, 1967 was only the start of the occupation. The term occupation, first used by the UN in 1967 to describe Israel's relationship to its newly acquired territories, is highly significant, as an occupying power under international law takes on a set of obligations, one of which is the maintenance of the status quo within a captured territory until a peace treaty or new civilian government is established. Israel, defying the UN Security Council and General Assembly, as well as the International Court of Justice, denies its occupier status, referring to the territories as merely disputed, and thus regularly acts in defiance of international law, which often adds to the suffering of those Palestinians under its control. Despite receiving residency rights within Israel, they must live in a hostile municipality determined to Judeify the city. Land is confiscated by the state to make way for exclusive Jewish-only neighbourhoods, forcing Palestinians to live in ever more crowded districts starved of funding, services and planning permits. Moreover, these Palestinians are now isolated from others by the separation barrier, built from the early 2000s roughly along the old Green Line that requires special permits to cross. The occupation remains throughout, with the Israelis and their military checkpoints controlling all entry and exit of goods and peoples into these areas, whilst retaining the final say over any significant economic, municipal or infrastructural developments. All Palestinians within the West Bank are under the jurisdiction of the Israeli military courts, and thousands are languishing in military prisons, with 500 incarcerated today without charge and without trial. Following the 2006 election of Islamic Party Hamas to the government of Gaza and the 3 subsequent conflicts between Israel and the territory, the Strip has been left in a state of unbelievable devastation, with high unemployment, undrinkable water and scarce supplies of food and medical facilities. Life for the Palestinians under the occupation is one of economic hardship, the threat of the soldiers and an inability to participate in the elections that really determine their lives. 50 years have now passed since the Six-Day War, and whilst the Palestinian resistance is still alive, Israel's position as occupier seems stronger than ever. Who knows what the next 50 years will bring?